Your engine is being slowly destroyed right now. Not by neglect, not by a blown gasket, not by some catastrophic mechanical failure you'd actually notice, by the bottle of oil sitting on the shelf at your local Supercheap that looks perfectly fine, costs $23, and has a label that says everything your engine needs. The wrong oil doesn't announce itself, it doesn't rattle, it doesn't smoke, it doesn't throw a warning light on day one. It just quietly wears your engine from the inside out, one cold start at a time, until the damage is already done and the bill that lands on your workbench makes your eyes water. The problem with cheap oil: understanding bad oil requires understanding what good oil actually does. This isn't just about lubrication, though lubrication is obviously the headliner. A modern engine oil is doing 7 or 8 jobs simultaneously, and the additive package, the chemical cocktail that makes up roughly 20 to 30% of every bottle, is what separates an oil that protects your engine from one that merely postpones its destruction. Good oil maintains its viscosity across the full operating temperature range. It needs to flow at minus 15 degrees on a Canberra winter morning and hold its film strength at 120 degrees under load on a 40-degree Queensland afternoon. Those are genuinely extreme demands, and the base stock quality, whether it's a Group 1 mineral, a Group 3 semi-synthetic, or a full Group 4 or 5 synthetic, determines whether the oil can actually meet them. Here's where the Australian market creates a specific problem. Our climate range is genuinely brutal. A vehicle that spends summer in Darwin and winter in the snowy mountains is asking more of its engine oil than almost any other market in the world. European oil specifications were developed for European conditions, and American specs were developed for American conditions. Australia has its own unique combination of extreme heat, long highway distances, remote driving, and stop-start urban traffic that punishes oil that was only designed to pass a laboratory test. The second problem is specification fraud. Now, I want to be careful here because not every brand I'm about to mention is deliberately deceiving you. Some of them are simply caught between the cost of producing a genuinely compliant oil and the price point the Australian market will accept, but the result is the same. An oil that claims a specification it cannot consistently meet in real-world conditions, in your actual engine, on an actual Australian road. When oil fails to maintain its viscosity under sustained load, the oil film that separates the crankshaft journals from the bearing shells gets thinner, not dramatically, not in a way you'd feel through the steering wheel or hear through the firewall, just a fraction thinner than it should be, at the worst possible moment, thousands of times per minute. A quick word before we go on: most people spend thousands of dollars repairing cars long before they actually need to. Professional mechanics have known for decades that a handful of simple habits can make almost any vehicle last far longer. And I've gathered 101 of those insider secrets into a book called The Mechanic's Bible. I won't mention it again. If you'd like a copy, the link is in the description. That's how bearing surfaces score. That's how camshafts develop premature wear. That's how a perfectly good engine becomes an engine rebuilder's revenue stream. Number 7, Nulon Budget Range. Nulon is a genuinely Australian brand, and I want to be fair here. Their premium range, the full synthetic products targeted at modern turbocharged engines, is legitimate, properly tested, and used by mechanics who know what they're doing. I am not here to torch the whole brand. What I am here to flag is the budget end of the Nulon range, specifically the mineral and entry-level semi-synthetic products that dominate the discount bin. Australian owners report a consistent pattern with these products. The oil looks fine, smells fine, and reads fine on the dipstick for the first few thousand kilometers. Then, somewhere between 5 and 7,000, the color darkens faster than a quality synthetic would allow, and more concerningly, the viscosity begins to drop under sustained highway load in Australian heat. Independent oil analysis from Australian sample testing services, and yes, used oil analysis is an actual thing you can and probably should be doing, has shown Nulon's budget mineral range shearing down in viscosity more aggressively than comparable products from Castrol, Mobil, and Penrite's better lines. What goes in as a 15W40 can test back as something closer to a thin 30 by the time it hits the end of its service interval in Australian summer conditions. For a modern engine, that matters enormously. Engines manufactured since roughly 2010 have tighter bearing clearances, higher operating temperatures, and turbochargers that need full oil film protection the moment you key the ignition. The engine that Nulon's budget range was originally calibrated for, the naturally aspirated, wide tolerance engines of the 1990s and early 2000s, is not the engine sitting in most Australian driveways in 2026. The deeper issue is that Nulon's pricing structure actively encourages owners toward the wrong product. The budget range sits at a price point that feels responsible. It's not the cheapest thing on the shelf. It's not the most expensive. It feels like the sensible middle ground, and that is exactly where the danger lives. Mechanics I've spoken to in workshops across Queensland and New South Wales specifically flag the budget Nulon range as a product they quietly recommend against for anything turbocharged or anything that does real work. For a basic, old, naturally aspirated runabout that gets changed every 5,000, probably fine. For a GU patrol towing a caravan through the Pilbara in 42-degree heat, please, for the love of your engine, don't. Number 6. Penrite, specific failures. Right. Penrite is going to generate angry comments. I can already see them. Let me be precise before the keyboard warriors start, because Penrite's premium range is genuinely well regarded, and there are mechanics across this country who swear by it for specific applications, their classic car oils, their Euro spec products, their HPR range for older high-performance engines, legitimate, respected, appropriately specified. The Penrite failure story is about application mismatch, and it is a documented pattern. Penrite has a wide product range that covers everything from vintage motorcycles to modern European turbo diesels, and the problem is that the range is so broad that owners, and occasionally inexperienced service staff, end up selecting the wrong product for the engine in front of them. Specifically, the HPR range, the high performance and racing formulations designed for older engines with wider bearing clearances, has been documented turning up in modern Euro engines where it has absolutely no business being. The higher viscosity products in the Penrite range that work beautifully in a classic V8 are genuinely harmful in a modern BMW N-Series engine or a Volkswagen EA88 that specifies a low viscosity, low SAPS oil to protect the diesel particulate filter. Australian owner forums, specifically the German car forums and the late model diesel communities, have documented cases where Penrite HPR was recommended by a parts store staff member, fitted by an owner who trusted that recommendation, and contributed to DPF blockages and cam chain wear issues that the engine manufacturer specifically traces back to incorrect oil specification. This is not Penrite lying about their product. Their products do what they say. The problem is a distribution and retail education failure that consistently puts the wrong Penrite product in the wrong engine. And in a market where Penrite is everywhere, every super cheap, every Repco, every servo with an oil display, the frequency of that mismatch is genuinely significant. The lesson here is narrow, but important. If someone hands you a bottle of Penrite and it has HPR on the label, and your engine is anything built after about 2008, stop and check the specification before you pour. Number 5. Halfords and private label store brands. Private label oil is the automotive equivalent of home brand biscuits that look exactly like the real thing until you bite in. Halfords, along with the various private label products that cycle through Super Cheap Auto, Repco, and the major service chains under house brand names, represent one of the most quietly damaging oil categories in the Australian market. Here is the fundamental problem with private label engine oil. You do not know who made it when it was made or what base stock it was built from. The label will tell you the viscosity, it will tell you the API service rating, It might tell you it meets certain OEM specifications. What it will not tell you is which contract blender filled the batch, whether the additive package is consistent between production runs, or how old the product is. Oil has a shelf life. This surprises a lot of people. Unused engine oil stored in an Australian warehouse can degrade over time, particularly in the heat. The antioxidant additives break down. The dispersant package weakens. The viscosity index improvers can settle or degrade in the container before you've even opened it. A premium branded oil manages this with consistent supply chains and stock rotation. A private label product sitting in a warehouse for 18 months before it hits the shelf is a different proposition entirely. Australian mechanics have flagged another specific issue with private label oil, batch inconsistency, because these products are typically blended by third-party contract blenders using whatever base stocks and additive packages are cheapest at the time of blending. The product in one bottle may not be identical to the product in the next bottle with the same label. For an engine that is running on extended service intervals, and plenty of Australian owners are stretching their oil changes, that inconsistency matters. The real trap is that private label oil often genuinely performs fine for the first oil change. The engine runs smoothly, there's no obvious problem, and the owner concludes the cheap oil was a good decision. What they don't see is the wear analysis that would tell them exactly how much more bearing surface was lost compared to the premium product. You only find that out at rebuild time, and by then you've forgotten what oil you ran 4 years ago. Number 4. Butter. Bardol is a name that's been on Australian shelves since what feels like the beginning of automotive time, and that longevity is part of the problem. There is a generation of Australian car owners, and I say this with the affection of someone who grew up hearing the name, who associate Bardol with quality simply because it was always there. The familiar label, the brand their dad used, the one that was behind the counter at every service station in 1978. The automotive world has moved on, and in certain specific ways. Bardol has not kept pace. Bardol's additive products, the engine treatments, the oil additives, the products designed to be poured in alongside your existing oil, have been the subject of sustained criticism from Australian engine builders and transmission specialists for over a decade. Here is the documented problem. Certain Bardol additive products contain chlorinated compounds and aggressive detergent packages that interact poorly with modern engine seals. The same chemical aggression that was marketed as cleaning your engine is documented to cause premature seal degradation in engines built after approximately 2005. The rubber compounds used in modern engine seals, specifically the fluoroelastomer seals in turbocharged engines, and the seal materials used in modern automatic transmissions, are not compatible with the chemistry some Bardol additives contain. Australian mechanics, particularly those who work on modern European and Japanese turbo diesels, have documented a pattern where seal leaks appear months after an owner has used a Bardol additive product, valve stem seals, turbo oil feed seals, rear main seals in transverse mounted engines, the kind of seals that are deeply inconvenient and expensive to replace, and whose failure nobody immediately connects to what was poured in during a service. The brand's oil products themselves sit in the middle of the market, not the worst thing available, not the best, but the additive range is where the genuinely documented damage lives, and the tragedy is that the people reaching for Bardol additives are typically the engaged owners. The ones who care about their engines, the ones who want to do extra. They're trying to do the right thing by their vehicle, and they're being let down by a brand that hasn't updated its chemistry fast enough for the engines it's being poured into. Number 3, STP. STP is an American brand with a marketing budget that has outrun its product development for approximately 30 years. The name recognition is extraordinary. There would not be a single Australian over the age of 35 who hasn't seen that red oval on a shelf somewhere, and that recognition has insulated STP from scrutiny in the Australian market for far longer than it should have. Let's start with the additive products because that's where STP built its name and where the damage is most thoroughly documented. STP's engine oil treatments have been tested independently by engineering academics, consumer protection organizations, and oil industry bodies across multiple countries. The consistent findings are uncomfortable. The products add viscosity, which sounds helpful, but they do so using a polymer thickener that creates a short-term feel of improved oil pressure while simultaneously compromising the oil's ability to properly lubricate at the bearing surfaces under high-frequency, high-pressure conditions. Put simply, the oil feels thicker, which the owner interprets as better. It is not better. What's happening at the molecular level is that the polymer chain is too large to penetrate the bearing surface film properly, and under sustained load, specifically under the kind of sustained load that an Australian driver doing a long highway run in summer would experience, those polymer chains shear down and the viscosity drops below where it started. You've paid for a product that temporarily improved your dipstick reading while ultimately degrading your oil's performance. The automotive equivalent of a payday loan. STP's own branded engine oils are a separate concern. These products have been specifically flagged by Australian oil analysts for inconsistent additive packages and for claiming API certifications that have not been verified through the independent API licensing program at the time of labeling. In plain English, the bottle says, it meets a standard that the oil has not been independently confirmed to meet. That is not a minor technical quibble, that is the entire basis on which you are trusting a product with your engine. For modern turbocharged engines, which is most of what Australia drives in 2026, the turbocharger bearing is the single most vulnerable point in the entire lubrication system. The turboshaft bearing receives oil at high pressure and needs full film lubrication from the moment the engine starts. An oil that cannot consistently deliver its stated viscosity at cold start and maintain it through sustained high temperature operation is not protecting that bearing. The turbocharger fails. The replacement cost in Australia runs anywhere from $1,800 on a small petrol unit to $6,000 or $7,000 on a performance diesel. And nobody asks what oil you were running when they hand you the quote. Number 2, Idemitsu, the wrong spec trap. Idemitsu is a genuine Japanese oil company with a genuine history, and what puts it this high on the list is not that the oil is bad. This requires nuance because the nuance is exactly what's destroying Australian engines. Idemitsu's core products, the ones properly specified for their intended applications, are perfectly competent oils with a legitimate Japanese manufacturing pedigree. The problem is the Australian retail environment Idemitsu operates in and the specific way the brand markets to Aussie consumers. Idemitsu oils are heavily promoted in Australia on the basis of their Japanese origin, targeting owners of Japanese vehicles, Toyota, Nissan, Honda, Subaru, Mazda, with the implied message that Japanese brand oil is the natural choice for a Japanese engine. And that message lands? It lands hard. Because it sounds completely logical. Here's where it goes wrong. Idemitsu's Australian product range does not consistently carry the current Toyota, Nissan, or Honda OEM specifications that a modern engine from those manufacturers actually requires. A current generation GR Yaris, for example, requires an oil that meets Toyota's WS or GF6 specification with specific low viscosity requirements. A current generation Subaru FA Series turbocharged engine requires an oil meeting specific low SAPS criteria to protect its emissions systems. Grabbing an Idemitsu product because it says formulated for Japanese engines on the label and assuming specification compliance is a mistake that Australian owners make constantly. Australian Toyota and Subaru specialists have documented this pattern repeatedly. An owner presents with a warranty-related engine issue. The mechanic asks for the service history. The owner produces receipts for Idemitsu oil, genuinely believing they've done the right thing by their Japanese car by using Japanese oil. The problem is the Idemitsu product they selected doesn't meet the current OEM specification, the warranty claim gets complicated, the owner gets an education they didn't sign up for. The broader lesson here is one of the most important in this entire video. Brand origin is not the same as specification compliance. A genuine American Mobil 1 full synthetic that meets your OEM specification will protect your Japanese engine far better than a mid-tier Japanese oil that doesn't. Your engine does not care about nationalism. It cares about whether the oil film holding its bearing surfaces apart was correctly formulated for the job. Check the specification first every single time. Country of origin is marketing. Specification compliance is engineering. Number 1, Armour, all engine. Oil and generic, super cheap house brands. And here we are. The number 1 spot belongs not to one specific brand, but to an entire category of product. And if the name Armour All Engine Oil surprised you because you knew Armour All as a tire shine and interior dressing company, then you are already beginning to understand the problem. Armour. All launched engine oil products in Australia under a brand that Australian consumers associate with looking after their cars. The brand recognition was extraordinary. The reputation was borrowed entirely from a product category that has nothing to do with engine lubrication, and the oils themselves, when subjected to independent analysis, have returned results that Australian engine specialists have described as genuinely alarming for any product claiming to be a modern engine oil. This is the category that houses the true financial time bombs of the Australian oil market. Armour, all branded oil. The generic house brand oil that cycles through discount stores and service stations under names you'd struggle to find independently tested data on. The bulk fill oil at the servo that comes out of an unlabeled drum. The products at the very bottom of the price ladder that sit in discount bins and catch the eye of the owner who is, through no fault of their own, simply trying to keep their car running on a tight budget. Here's the specific documented failure pattern that Australian engine rebuilders consistently describe. These oils are blended to a price point, not to a standard. The base stock is typically the cheapest Group 1 mineral or a low quality Group 2 available at the time of blending. The additive package is minimal, just enough chemistry to allow a claimed API rating to appear on the label without the substantive anti-wear, antioxidant and dispersant chemistry that actually protects a modern engine. The viscosity index improvers are the cheapest available, which means they shear down fastest, which means the oil that started as a 10W30 arrives at the end of its drain interval, behaving like something thinner than a 20. Australian engine rebuilders, specifically the independent specialists who strip down high kilometer engines and photograph what they find inside, have published their findings on Australian forums and social media with a consistency that deserves far more mainstream attention than it gets. The carbon deposits, the varnish on piston skirts, the glazed cylinder walls, the scored bearing surfaces, the coked turbo oil feed lines that restricted oil flow to the bearing at exactly the moment the turbo needed it most. These are engines that were not neglected, they were serviced. They were serviced with cheap oil at regular intervals, and the cheap oil, slowly and silently, did exactly what the price suggested it would. The Armour All category specifically earns the top spot because of the brand trust transfer problem. Nobody walks into a servo and buys oil from a brand they've never heard of. They buy Armour All oil because they know Armour All. They've used Armour All tire shine for 20 years. They trust the name. And the brand knowingly traded on that trust to sell an engine oil product that independent analysis has shown consistently underperforms its claimed specifications in real-world Australian operating conditions. That is not a quality control failure. That is a marketing decision dressed as a mechanical product. The owners who get hurt by this aren't the ones who went in looking for cheap oil. They're the ones who thought they were buying a trusted brand, That gap between what the brand reputation implies and what the product actually delivers is what makes this the most damaging category on this entire list. At least with a no-name brand, you knew you were taking a punt. With Armor All engine oil, you thought you were doing the right thing. The turbo on the 2-litre diesel that's now costing you $4,000 to replace, it didn't fail because you abused the car. It failed because the oil film protecting the shaft bearing at 200,000 RPM was not what the bottle told you it was, and the engine rebuilder looking at your scored journals and your coked up oil galleys can see exactly what happened. He just can't go back in time and stop you from grabbing that bottle off the shelf 18 months ago. So there they are, 7 oil brands and categories that Australian mechanics quietly wince at when they see the empty bottle on the workbench. Newlon's budget range, underpowered for Australia's heat and modern turbocharged engines. Penrite's HPR line, brilliant in the right application and destructive in the wrong one. Halfords and private label store brands, batch inconsistent, shelf degraded, and fundamentally opaque about what's actually inside. Bardal's additive range, well-intentioned chemistry from a different era, landing in engines it was never designed for. STP, 30 years of marketing credibility propped up by a product that shears down under load and borrows API ratings it hasn't always earned. Idemitsu, the Japanese brand that feels right for Japanese cars and consistently catches owners out on specification compliance. And topping the list, Armor All engine oil and the generic house brand category that weaponizes brand trust against the very owners trying to do the right thing. My honest takeaway is the same one every engine rebuilder in this country would give you. Oil specification compliance is not optional and it is not complicated. Your owner's manual tells you the viscosity, it tells you the specification, API, ACEA, OEM, that the oil must meet. Your job is to match those two things, not to find a brand that sounds familiar, not to grab the one that's on special, not to trust a label that says words like premium or advanced or professional without a verifiable specification behind them. The $200 pre-purchase inspection catches the problems the previous owner was hiding. The $10 extra you spend on a genuinely specified synthetic over the cheapest bottle on the shelf is the same investment applied to your own engine. Not exciting? Not the purchase you feel good about the way you feel good about a new set of tires or a lift kit, just quietly, consistently, invisibly, the thing that means your engine is still running properly at 250,000 kilometers while someone else's identical engine is being quoted, a rebuild on the wrong side of 100. Get your oil specification right, run the correct change interval, buy from a brand that can show you documented third-party testing data, and if someone hands you a bottle with a label you don't recognize and a price that seems too good to be true, it is. Now I want to hear from you. Have you been burned by cheap oil? Have you pulled a sump plug on a high-mileage engine and seen what the wrong oil actually leaves behind? Are you a mechanic who wants to add a brand to this list that I didn't cover? Drop it in the comments. The workshop horror stories, the near misses, the engines that survived despite everything, all of them welcome. If this video saved your engine, or at least saved you from a decision you'd have regretted, give it a like, hit subscribe for more straight shooting, Aussie car advice, and I'll see you in the next one. Look after your engine. It's the one thing in your car that genuinely cannot be half fixed.